Greetings, metalheads, and welcome to No Nonsense Metal Reviews. I'm George, and today I'm back with another top pick, another album which haven't actually heard this one in quite a long time. I'm gonna say it's probably getting on for about a year, but randomly popped into my head, decided to revisit it, and decided it's absolutely worth recommending to you. So you may have seen some of the previous episodes of today's pick that I have done recently. This is a fairly new show here on the channel, but essentially it's me revisiting something maybe that I haven't heard in a while, or maybe it's something that I've just stumbled upon, but I think it's absolutely worth your time checking out. So today's pick, the debut album from 2007. Revisited this for, as I say, first time in a long time. I'm talking about The Cleansing from Suicide Silence. US Deathcore heavyweights. Now, I do completely appreciate that Deathcore is not for every metalhead. It's not even for every death metalhead. I do totally appreciate Deathcore is a bit of an acquired taste, and I will say that I don't tend to listen to a huge amount of Deathcore. To be honest, I prefer my death metal more in the old school vein of Morbid Angel and Bolt Thrower and Cannibal Corpse, Obituary, stuff like that. Tend to gravitate more towards that, but I do appreciate a nice, weighty, seismic breakdown and some seriously chugging riffs. I do appreciate that. So there's a couple of deathcore bands that have stuck with me over the years. When I was a bit younger, I have to say, I did listen to a lot more deathcore than I do now. But other than Suicide Silence and Whitechapel, the majority of other deathcore bands I've kind of forgotten about a little bit. But Suicide Silence are a band, along with Whitechapel, that I feel push the boundaries of deathcore. Deathcore is a very tight pigeonhole. Deathcore, there's not a lot of room for maneuver there. Some bands combine deathcore with symphonic elements and produce something entirely different and grand, like Lorna Shore. Other bands go off in sort of blackened directions. That's fine. But I think in terms of just being, I guess, a deathcore band, Suicide Silence, Whitechapel, they really push it for me. And they tick all the boxes because it's not just about those massive crushing breakdowns. They've got really well written songs, really well written albums. But what I think is so great about The Cleansing, the debut album from Suicide Silence, is that this is almost like a deathcore album from a deathcore band that isn't necessarily just going to appeal to deathcore fans. This is almost like deathcore for non-deathcore fans, as it does have a lot of characteristics of, I guess, brutal death metal, a little bit more technicality thrown in there. There's a little bit of an old school death metal vibe there, but there's also a lot of influence and flavors thrown in and, I guess, projected upon it from what was happening within the metal world at that time. If we consider 2007, nu metal's light is fading. However, there are some heavyweights that came out of that scene who were maybe evolving themselves, but they've had a lasting impression, a lot of influence there. If we're talking about bands like Slipknot and Korn, for example, a lot of bands were very heavily influenced by those. Of course they were, and look, they've gone on to become absolute giants. So what you get with The Cleansing, and actually in this particular format, which I'll get onto in a moment, there's a little interview piece with Chris Garza, guitarist of Suicide Silence there, who does cite both of those bands, Slipknot and Korn, as being quite an influence. So you get a little bit of an influence of nu metal, and I'm not a massive nu metal fan either, but I do love Slipknot, and you can definitely hear Slipknot's influence here in the aggression in the music, also in the really thick, dirgy, down-tuned riffs. You can really pick up that Iowa era influence. But I would also say that there's a lot of other more death metal influences here. Certainly from bands like Suffocation, Dying Fetus, Cannibal Corpse, Deeds of Flesh, bands like that. If you're a fan of those sorts of bands, Nile as well, even, then you are definitely going to be able to appreciate what's going on here with the cleansing. As I say, when I was younger, much more into deathcore, but even with my maybe less matured musical sensibilities back then, I've always really appreciated this album for its outright brutality. This is a really heavy album. It's got some cracking breakdowns. I mean, proper atomic bomb level seismic earthquake riffing going on there. But it's also got snare drums or blast beat driven, fast in your face approach. It's a very energetic album. Lineup wise, of course, most of us will be familiar with frontman vocalist the late Mitch Lucker, who is sadly no longer with us. Killed a few years ago now. It's quite a few years ago. Actually, I can't remember exactly when, but he was still a very young man. Tragically, his life was cut short in a motorcycle accident. But although 2007, early on in the band's life, he was a very young man then. He's got a good deathcore voice. He's not quite up there, or he wasn't quite up there. You know, all respect and no disrespect, but he wasn't ever really quite up there with like Phil Bozeman of Whitechapel, for example, in my opinion, or Eddie Hermedia, who replaced Mitch subsequently in Suicide Silence. So, no, he's not the best vocalist, but actually, his voice really does fit the music. It's not quite a snarl, it's not quite a shriek. There's absolutely no cleans, so rest assured there's no metalcore influence here. It's all death. It's very much in the death kind of style. Growls, gutturals, really good, actually. You know, I will say, from revisiting this album, because I've listened to it a number of times in preparation for doing this as a recommendation. The first time I revisited it, I just knew that it was going to be one that was going to be a today's pick. So had to give it a few spins, and I think with each spin, kind of come to appreciate Mitch's voice and his vocals a little bit more. No, he's not up there, as I say, with other deathcore heavyweights, nor is he up there with death metal frontmen like Corpse Grinder Fisher or Frank, Suffocation. Not quite, but still good. Good vocals. The highlight, the real standout, in my opinion, is actually in the riffs. The riffs and the guitar tone is, as I say, it's very down-tuned, like a nu metal style, but they are thick. They are wall riffing, proper bulldozing stuff. Absolutely brilliant. So the band is completed by Chris Garza, as I say, alongside Mark Haleman on guitars, a very good guitar duo. Then we've got Mike Bodkins on bass and Alex Lopez on drums. So Mike, I believe he must have left the band after the cleansing, but good lineup. What really does strike me is that these guys were very young then, but what they're doing is they're combining and wearing their influences very much on their sleeves. Very much. As I say, there's Slipknot and Korn all over this, but at the same time, they've got the aggression of Suffocation, Dying Fetus, Cannibal Corpse. That's all there. And they're really harnessing that. But they're producing something which, 2007, deathcore was definitely a thing, but I feel that this album is very much ahead of its time as well. It's brutal stuff, but it's really well written. Got some brilliant, memorable tracks here. The album is actually quite well produced, I will say. Produced and engineered by John Travis. Very good sounding album. This is just the original, well, maybe not the original, but this is just the old school standard version with a bonus track there of Dead Current. You can now get this version, which is the Ultimate Edition, which came out 2022, a couple of years ago now, to mark, I suppose it'd be 15 years of the album, and it includes in this nice digipack, we've got a bonus disc which features some live tracks from Paris and some rehearsal instrumentals as well. But the album itself kicks off in fine form, following the Revelations intro with a track called Unanswered, which is absolutely freaking seismic. Brutal, brutal stuff. As I say, we've got those blast beats driving, we've got those riffs which are thick and nasty. It's proper dirty stuff. Hands of a Killer, absolutely brilliant. Proper headbang, neck busting material there, with some decent gutturals from Mitch. The Price of Beauty, a slightly more well-known track, I believe, from Suicide Silence, from this album. Great stuff. But then we get on to the really strong material, The Fallen. That has an absolute monster of a breakdown there. Some serious chugging going on, really thick visceral stuff. Again, Mitch doing some of the strongest vocal work there. He's kind of combining that kind of more nu metal vocal approach, not rapping at all, but faster pace with gutturals as well. Real deep, proper, vomit your own diaphragm style gutturals. No Pity for a Coward. Of course, we can't talk about The Cleansing without talking about arguably the most known track on this album and one of Suicide Silence's biggest songs. No Pity for a Coward, with its very memorable, catchy chorus. Freaking monstrous breakdown again. But again, we've got those driving, blasting drums. We've got that really thick bass as well, which is just kind of bubbling away underneath the surface there, keeping everything going. The Disease, another good one. But my favourite tracks follow a little bit later here. We've got Girl of Glass, which I think is a bit of a deeper cut. But again, it's a great track. Sinister stuff, definitely. And my personal favourite, Inner Photograph, just for that freaking beast of a riff. There are some seriously beastie riffs there. Again, supported by that really thunderous low end, proper gut churning stuff. And it really does bring Suffocation to mind, more modern Suffocation. It brings Dying Fetus in there as well. Freaking heavy stuff. As I say, this is deathcore. Yeah, you can't deny it. But it's leaning more on the death metal side, and this is definitely the sort of deathcore sort of album that I personally feel a death metal fan who likes their Broken Hope, they like their Cannibal Corpse, as I say, you're going to be able to pick this up and you're actually going to be able to enjoy it. It's not just hardcore kids flailing around, it's really good musicianship, really well written songs, they're just freaking heavy. So this version then, an interesting little piece. I actually just picked this up the other day on Amazon. It was about $7.99, so it's really cheap. If you are looking to get a copy and you don't want to spend the earth for it, you can get this really nice digi package, as I say, courtesy of Century Media Records. The album, I don't believe it's actually remastered here, not quite sure, but it sounds great, and it's got the bonus tracks. So it closes off the original sort of full-length album with Green Monster, which is a good track, definitely. But then we've got two tracks, which are actually re-recordings from the debut EP, self-titled EP. We've got A Dead Current and Swarm. Actually, I think it's Destruction of a Statue might be from the EP. Can't quite remember, but there's some re-recordings there, and they sound monstrous. Freaking enormously heavy, really good. Consistency, it sounds consistent with the other album material. Freaking formidably heavy, actually, and I'd not heard Swarm until I'd listened to this particular version, and I was very, very, very impressed with just the freaking formidable weight of that track. It's proper headbang along stuff. Then we got a Deftones cover track called Engine Number 9. I personally I'm not a Deftones fan I've never really listened to that. I can't honestly say. I've certainly never heard the original of that. I've heard little bits and pieces of Deftones over the year, but I've never really committed and actually sat down and listened to Deftones. I don't know. There's so much music out there, so much great stuff. I just haven't got around to it. Maybe one day, you never know. But their cover is good. It just sounds very nu metal. It just sounds very, I don't know, groovy, bouncy stuff, but in a Suicide Silence kind of way. So it's a good little package here. You've got the complete thing. Then we've got a second disc, as I mentioned. We've got 8 tracks from the Cleansing album, recorded live in Paris with Eddie on vocals. So obviously this is much more recent, and these live versions sound great. Eddie, and in the live setting, still does the original material justice. Good tribute to Mitch. Just great to hear those earlier tracks from this, possibly my favourite. Actually, I would say this is my favourite Suicide Silence album, definitely. And it's good to hear those tracks in that live setting. Very nice. Then what we get is really quite cool. I believe these were actually recorded on a cassette tape player in Chris Garza's garage, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you're from. 4 instrumental rehearsal tape tracks, which sound very raw and very primitive. We've got Hands of a Killer, In a Photograph, which is an absolute monster, The Fallen, and an untitled track as well. All very good, but those tracks in particular, that's definitely more for if you are a Suicide Silence fan, or if you are already an existing fan of this album. It's just quite nice to hear those very youthful demo versions. But overall, this is a nice package. You can pick it up for next to nothing, as I say. It's very cheap now. And it's just a nice piece to have. So, I've really thoroughly enjoyed revisiting The Cleansing. As I say, it's been a while since I've heard it, and I still think that it sounds fresh to this day. It sounds original. No, it's not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but as I say, I do think that The Cleansing is definitely ahead of its time, or it was ahead of its time. If you're a fan of Slipknot and Machine Head, and you also like, as I say, you like your Cannibal Corpse, you like your Suffocation, then you're definitely going to be able to appreciate this album. If for nothing else, than the massively groovy chugging riffs, crushing breakdowns, gargling gutturals, and driving drumming. It's a good album, a solid album. No, Deathcore is not for everyone, but I would say this is a good Deathcore album for non-Deathcore fans. And if you are a Deathcore fan, you're still going to be able to appreciate it. It's a win-win. So as I say, I've really enjoyed revisiting it. If you haven't heard this album before, check it out. Give it a chance. Tracks to check out. I would say you definitely need to hear Unanswered. You definitely want to hear No Pity for a Coward. And I'd say check out In a Photograph as well, because that's an absolute beast. It's a deeper cut, but it's an absolute beast. And if you are a fan, or if you have heard this, revisit it, give it another spin, and let me know what you think. Let me know what your feelings and thoughts are about this one. So that's today's pick. Suicide Silence, US Deathcore beasts with their debut full-length album from 2007, The Cleansing. Thank you very much for watching, my friends. Do put some comments in the comments section there. Get some interaction going. Interested to hear your thoughts and feelings on this particular album. But thank you very much for watching. Please do feel free to like, subscribe, share. It's all very much appreciated. Really do appreciate the continued support. Check back soon for more reviews and recommendations of all the good heavy things. Until next time, my friends, do take care of yourselves and stay frickin' heavy.